Hey, my name is Bree and I'm here with my friend Chris, and we are going to be talking about penises, which is always a really fun conversation to have. In particular, we're talking about circumcision, and Chris and I have a shared interest in all things circumcision, kind of. So my first question for you today is, are you circumcised?
Yep, I am circumcised.
Alright, so that is kind of the subject for today. We're doing an interview about circumcision and Chris's feelings on it. So when did you realize growing up that you were circumcised?
It was probably when I was like 10 or 11 years old. You know, I saw like a scar that went around my penis, and I always thought that was a little bit strange because, like, if you look at circumcised penis, it's like very tan and colored up to a certain point, and then it's abruptly like pale. It's actually the circumcision scar. That's what creates that stark difference in appearance between like the pale white and the tan skin color. So yeah, it was probably when I noticed that when I was 10 or 11, and I thought it was a little bit strange, but I'd been living with it my whole life, so I didn't really look too much further at that point.
You didn't have a name for it at that point? It was just something you noticed about your body?
No, I didn't have a name for it.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh, huh, it's a little strange. Like it didn't look very natural. I'm not really sure what more to say about it at that point, but I just thought it was a little strange. Nothing too much to be worried about at that point, but yeah.
So what eventually led you to being upset about circumcision?
So I browse Reddit kind of frequently, and there's a subreddit called WTF, which has like the most vile, disgusting, shocking stuff you can see on the internet. And one video that sparked my interest in researching circumcision is a video of a newborn baby boy being circumcised, and it was the single most horrifying thing I'd ever seen on camera, like on video before. It was the worst. Like, you could hear the baby screaming in agony tied to a board. It was the most grotesque thing I've ever seen on the internet, and I almost started throwing up watching that video. I'd never seen anything like that before, so that's really what sparked my interest in researching circumcision.
Were there any people who kind of helped you along that journey?
Yeah, when I saw that video on WTF, I showed it to Dre because I was so horrified that I wanted some sort of like explanation or justification, or at least someone to share it with. So I showed it to Dre and my friend Andre, and he started telling me all about how circumcision is a very antiquated, brutal ritual, about its history, about how it's completely unnecessary. And he really got me into researching it, because once he started telling me these things, I was a little bit hesitant at first. I was like, hold on there a second, that's a lot of stuff you're talking about, stuff that I've never heard of before about my own body, So once he told me that pertinent information, I actually just went online on Google and I started doing all of the research by myself. And the more I looked into it, the more horrified and disgusted I was, and more sad and angry, and a whole other list of emotions, that I never thought to experience. But yeah, my friend Andre, he's the one who really facilitated me researching circumcision.
Do you feel like if he had never phrased it as something negative, would you still have come to the same conclusion, or would you have been fine with it?
I think I would have come to the same conclusion, because something that I've kind of like a real interest for me is evaluating American social norms and basically American customs, things that we hold to be dear in America, but the rest of the world looks at us strangely for. So I was naturally like interested in things like that. So like when I stumbled across something as massive and accepted as circumcision, I had to look into it because this isn't just one of those things that that doesn't affect people. That's minor, and it's a small cultural thing. It affects everyone. It's forced. It's forced on defenseless babies who can't talk, who can't consent. It's forced on these poor infants, and a lot of people will give religious justifications for it. Oh, it's my religion. It's my religious mandate to do it. I would tell you this: your baby has no religion. He has no religious association. He can't identify with any philosophy, with any set of beliefs at all, because he's a baby. If you want your baby to partake, to choose to partake later when he's older, that's one thing. Maybe if you educate him, and if you talk to him, and it's his decision, then it's his decision. But if you're forcing surgical religious acts on your own children, it's just the strangest, most disgusting thing I've ever heard of. And
Were you circumcised for religious reasons?
No, I wasn't.
Did you ever get to talk to your parents about why?
I did talk to my parents. So basically, I started researching all of circumcision and stuff in the spring semester of last year. And during that semester, I did all of the research that I could possibly do into every area, into every single reason why people say we should be circumcised. I looked into every single reason, all of the evidence behind it, and I looked at the other side, why we shouldn't circumcise. And the proponents of circumcision are just totally wrong in every single way. And basically, when I got back from school, from that semester at school, I flew back home up to Maine, and that's when I started talking to my parents about it. I outright asked them, why did you circumcise me? And then my mom and dad replied something like, oh, it's just something that they do to boys, it's very common and normal. And and I asked them in response, do you even know what circumcision is or what it does? And they were really clueless. They had no idea what the functions of the foreskin was, or how pleasurable and amazing it is to have a foreskin, and how it's an important, sensitive, intimate part of the male body. They didn't know all that stuff. I mean, I was born in 1995. And back then, access to the internet wasn't something very widespread. It was around back then, but it really wasn't something that most people would have access to easily, like today on their phones. So yeah, that's when I told my parents about it, and eventually they apologized, because they knew that I was upset over it. And after that, I kept showing them more and more videos and resources about why I think circumcision is bad. And I did an extensive research paper on it this past semester at PBA. And I sent it to my dad, and he found it very convincing. So, I'm really glad I've been able to reach my parents further with that information.
So you feel happy with their reaction towards, your research and what you've brought to them, but how do you feel towards the situation in general? How do you feel towards them for making that choice for you?
Well, I felt really sad and angry at the same time. Like it'd been stolen, like part of me had been permanently stolen and taken away from me. without my choice at all, and without even being able to experience what my whole body feels like. So I was pretty upset and angry about that. But then I kind of looked into their, like, what they were experiencing at around the point where I was born, and from what I've learned, from what they've told me, they had no idea. It was something that was very common that no one talked about, except for that one time, or multiple times in the hospital when doctors continuously solicit this unnecessary procedure and harmful procedure. And when I look at what they went through, and about how they were really just ignorant, and that they didn't really have anyone telling them the right information, I can't hold them responsible at all, because they didn't know any better. No one told them. They were totally clueless. I really do blame the doctors and the healthcare professionals for actually continuing to solicit this disgusting, barbaric procedure to vulnerable mothers and parents of their precious children. It's the worst. It's got to be like one of the worst things that's happening in the United States right now. Like, every day, like, hundreds, thousands of boys are being strapped to boards and cut apart, and no one's fighting for them. No one's defending them. None of the healthcare professionals are saying, "Hey, we need to end this. This is really bad." None of them are talking about that. We have great groups out there like the Bloodstained Men and Intact America, and these other groups that are really doing well and helping many families and children, and protecting them from the forced genital cutting in the United States. And that's what makes me really happy, looking towards the future, because I see that we have groups like this that have been around for actually quite a while, like since before I was born, and they continue to fight for children's rights so that they can be born and so that they can live a happy whole life without people forcibly cutting off parts of their genitals. So I'm really glad that they exist. I wish that when I was born, someone had talked to my parents about that, because if they had known what I know now, there's no way that they would have done it, because my parents loved me. They loved me a lot. They were just misled by disgusting doctors who push ethics to the side.
Luckily, I feel like that's changing a little bit, and it was voices like yours that actually stopped me from circumcising my son, but also my midwife did let me know that it was not a medically necessary procedure, which was kind of big also. So I'm glad that it's changing a little bit, but definitely when you were a kid, when you were born, it was a different story.
Yeah.
So I think it goes without saying, but if you were given the choice, would you have remained intact?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a million times. Yeah.
Do you feel like you're missing out?
Yeah, I really do. I've talked to several of my intact friends, and they tell me about how amazing the foreskin feels, and how it keeps the head of their penis like nice and like moist and sensitive, whereas mine is like dry and thick-skinned, and really, like, you don't even have to have intact friends to know this. All you have to do is just Google it, like, what is the foreskin and what does it do? How does it feel? And then you'll see, yeah, this is really bad, because, I believe a paper from the British Journal, no, it was from a journal of urology from, I forget who the author is, but he goes in to examine the kind of nerve endings that are found in the foreskin, and he basically finds that there are around 20,000 of these really sensitive, pleasurable nerve endings that are completely amputated due to circumcision. And just logically thinking about that, how when you circumcise your kid, you're stealing away 20,000 extremely pleasurable nerve endings from his body, never to be felt again. It's just horrendous, you know. A lot of parents really don't seem to realize or understand the history behind circumcision, you know, which I guess is a topic for another time, because there's a huge history behind circumcision. But I'll just briefly say that circumcision was meant to hurt men and take away their pleasure, and that's why it's still here today. People may not say that's why they do it, but that is the underlying reason why it exists today, to hurt men. So, yeah.
Yeah, the history might be something we get to talk about in the near future in another video. So, do you feel like being circumcised has impacted your self-perception?
Yeah, because really ever since I learned about it, and, you know, I talked with Dre deeply about this topic, and I did all of my research and all of this and that, and it really has affected my, you know, self-image. You know, like, from, you know, small things, like every time I go up to pee, like, I have to see this scar on my penis, and it'll be there for the rest of my life until I die, you know, and there's nothing I can do about it. There's really not too much you can do about it, you know. It wasn't my choice. It was forced on me. I feel like I've been stolen from, and that I can't get it back, and that I'll never be able to experience the same amount of sexual pleasure as my intact friends, or as all the other happy, intact men on earth. That's what really gets to me sometimes, like, that I'm missing out, and that there's nothing I can do about it, and there's nothing that will change it. So that's what kind of bums me out, you know. Every time I see myself, it just reminds me of, like, what I went through when I was a baby, and I don't like that.
So have you ever considered foreskin restoration?
I have, and it looks like a very promising thing that a lot of men can choose to do. Although I feel like in my situation it wouldn't be very viable, because I think I have what they call a high and tight circumcision, which is essentially when they take off as much foreskin as they can. They basically amputate all of it, so that the circumcision scar is near the halfway point of the shaft on your penis, so that if you were to try to restore your foreskin, it would probably take like 10 years, probably around 10 years of constant stretching, like every day, in order to restore it. And, you know, I'm not sure if I want to go through that long of a journey. I may end up, like, changing my mind later and doing it, but in my case it doesn't seem very viable because of the nature of how extensive the circumcision was in my situation.
So I think it goes without saying, but you would not circumcise future sons?
No, never. I won't even let my family do it at all. You know, if anyone in my family were to do it in the future, you know, they would get an earful from me and my parents, you know, and my siblings, you know, my sisters, because they're very anti, you know, boy cutting. So I think future members of my family will be safe from, you know, the American genital cutting practice.
That's good.
So, yeah.
And that's something that you're influencing.
Yeah,
which is
that's
really
what
cool.
I'm happy about it. You know, that's why I'm happy. You know, I was able to talk to pretty much all of my friends. I've told all of my friends about it. You know, I've told my parents about it, my sisters about it. You know, it's just something that, you know, it's really important, and you know, needs to be spread about, because we just can't let this continue happening. It's a shame. It is a national shame and tragedy that this exists in 2016 or 2017. You know, it's a tragedy, and it has to stop. So, yeah, I'm glad I can help in the effort and stop this brutality to our infants. You know.
So one reason we're making this video is for people who are indecisive about circumcision. What would you say to someone who is watching right now who might not be decided one way or another?
What I would really tell to parents who are indecisive is to look at two things. First thing would be the functions of the foreskin, because in order to understand what circumcision is and why complete amputation of the foreskin is a bad thing, you have to understand what is being removed. What's being removed is a very sensitive, pleasurable layer of skin that slides over the head of the male penis, and it provides it with a protective layer so that the head of the penis doesn't brush up against everything and become damaged or cut or desensitized. Basically, it's there to make the guy, it's there to give the guy a lot of pleasure, because inside the foreskin itself are a lot of very sensitive nerve endings that are easy to manipulate and provide the man with a lot of pleasure. So that's one thing you need to understand about circumcision, is that you're removing a very valuable piece, a very intimate, sensitive, and private part of his body, one that people won't really ever see. You know, not too many people in his life will ever see the scar on his penis because of the sensitive and private nature. So I believe that circumcision does even more damage because it's this secretive mutilation that happens here that no one really knows about, that's not very visible. For example, if you were to cut off another part of your son's body, say if you were to cut off of his ear because you didn't want to clean behind his ear in the shower, then he'd go the rest of his life without his ear, and everyone could see it, and everyone would feel bad for him, and everyone would be sorry. But when it comes to circumcision, it's a step higher in the cruelty measure, because no one's ever going to see it. No one's ever going to console him when he's sad that someone cut him up when he was a baby. No one's ever really going to see it. No one's ever really going to care. That's the sad thing about it. It's a very secretive mutilation that not too many people will notice. And that's one of the reasons that people get away with it. So yeah, the first reason would be look at the foreskin and its functions, and then the second way to convince parents would be to just watch a video of a baby being circumcised. It'll probably be the hardest video to watch, like the hardest video you'll ever watch in your entire life. At least it was for me. But it gives a whole new perspective to everything you know about circumcision. Because if you're a parent, if you're a expecting parent right now and you've been researching circumcision, chances are you've been reading a lot of text materials that talk about it and the procedure, like you cut down the foreskin and you excise and this and that. That doesn't really provide you with enough instinctual knowledge to know that circumcision is bad.
You have to watch it.
Yeah, you have to watch a circumcision in order to understand the kind of gravity of a situation that a circumcision is. It's not a light procedure, it's not a quick procedure, it's not a painless procedure. It is a painful, forced, genital cutting procedure that only boys face in the United States. And if you watch a video one, I can almost guarantee you 100% you will not cut your kids, because you will see that circumcision is awful in nature, it's harmful in nature, and it's not natural at all. You know, so those would be a couple things that I'd have parents know before making any decisions.
So it kind of comes full circle for you with that, but I guess, do you have any final thoughts for anyone watching this video? Anything else you'd like to say before we close out today?
The one thing that I would recommend everyone do, if you're not very familiar with circumcision or why it's controversial, or you know why anyone should even care, just research it, look into it. If you're unsure as to why circumcision is controversial or why people are against it, just watch a video of it. You'll see this poor helpless baby strapped to a board, and you'll see this group of doctors and nurses all huddling around the table, and then they start bringing out knives and scissors, and they start cutting the baby apart, and the baby screams at the top of his lungs, to the point where some babies burst blood vessels, some babies fall unconscious and they don't wake up afterwards for a while. Some babies go into a state of silent shock where they don't say anything because they're experiencing so much pain and trauma at such a young age. So if you need context information as to why this is important at all, just go watch a video of one. You'll understand really quickly why it's a bad thing. So yeah, I guess those would be my final thoughts to anyone looking into it.
Yeah, it is important, and it's important to talk about. So thank you so much for being here today and sharing your side of it as a circumcised man, which I think is really important and not enough people do. So thank you for being here.
Well, I'm glad I can share.
And thanks for watching. If you have any questions for myself or for Chris, please leave them down below in the comments. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.